Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. This is William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, acting like that didn't happen. Welcome back, Rabbi Stuart Federow, with another episode of, well, we're calling it now Judaism and Christianity, a contrast with that awesome Rabbi from the super big H, Houston, Texas. Welcome back, Rabbi. How are you this wonderful afternoon,
Thank God.
evening?
I'm tired, but I'm okay.
Yeah.
You know how that goes.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I've been digging post holes all day and fixing a fence from a big storm we had. Finally getting some exercise. Some probably much needed exercise, but maybe not. I'd rather not have the exercise sometimes. So, okay, so here we are. We're getting up on the second half. Well, this could be the second half, depending on how well it flows. If we need a part 3 of this, so be it. But after this is over, we got one more chapter in the book to cover, and then we're going to get back to our call-in, back and forth Q&A, which I really miss also.
Yeah, me too.
And looking forward to doing that. But we have some T's to cross and some I's to dots before we do that.
We have like 5 more of the most commonly used, more or less, verses as proof texts by Christians to prove their Christian theology from the TaNaCh, from the Hebrew Scriptures.
Yeah, I hear you. Andrea, that's fun. I'm listening and looking at the chat. Andrea, that's funny. even a broken clock is right twice a day. That's good.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, anyway, so that's good. Okay, so we'll get this thing right on the road and let you take off with us, and let's see where it goes.
Okie dokie.
Right on.
All right, so let's do this.
Okay.
All right. So in the book, it's number 6, quotation number 6. It comes from Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 through 7.
Hold on one second. Let me put that up here. I've got it already on the screen. I just got to pull it over real fast. Let's do this right here. Plus, I need to put your contact information on there for a few minutes while we do that. Okay, here we go. All right. Well, we're at Isaiah 6. That's the wrong side. Let me
It's number 6, Isaiah chapter 9.
Yeah, hold on. It's when I reset my computer and it actually shifted everything. Let me fix that real fast. You can go and start chit-chatting, and I'll put it on screen here in just a second.
All right. Well, you'll see it come up on screen, but Christians hold that the verses Isaiah chapter 9, verses 6 through 7, whatever, are speaking of Jesus who came into the world as a child. But when you read this, when we talk about it, there should be a whole bunch of questions that pop up in your minds. Okay, so Isaiah chapter 9, 6 to 7. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, in order to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Eternal of hosts will perform this. So, first thing to talk about is the translation, not in any detail, but just to point this out. Notice in verse 6, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called. Some translations have this as Wonderful Counselor. Some have this translation as Wonderful Counselor. In other words, they will see it as the word counselor modified by the adjective wonderful, and some will see it as 2 separate names, or part of a name, or 2 names out of the multiple names that they claim this is about Jesus, that Jesus has been called. Okay, so it goes on to say, verse 7, of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end. And before that in verse 6, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. When did Jesus ever run a government? Jesus was put to death by a Roman government, but when did he ever run a government? The government shall be upon his shoulder. Of the increase of his government and peace, there shall be no end. So Jesus was never called by any of these names anywhere in the Christian's New Testament, and not at all in his own lifetime. They seem to misunderstand the quotation because they do not understand Hebrew, they don't understand names, and they don't understand Hebrew names. In any language, every name has a meaning. So An example would be Anthony, which means priceless, and the name Alexander means protector. So if we give a child the first and middle name of Anthony Alexander, did that mean that we're saying that this child is a priceless protector? Would our paths cross with that child and say, hey, priceless protector, how are you? Because the meaning of Anthony Alexander might be priceless protector, but his name isn't priceless and his name isn't protector. His name is Anthony Alexander. We use names, not the meaning of the names. So Hebrew names, not always, but sometimes say something about God, even if they're given to a human being. The name Michael, Michael, who is like God? The name Elihu, my God is he, or he is my God. The name Emmanuel, God is with us, to give a few examples, names you've heard of. Now, if someone has the name Elihu, which means he is my God, or my God is he, would that mean that the human being known as Elihu is God? Obviously not. The names say something about God, but they're given as names to ordinary human beings. A better translation, a possible translation of the verse in question might be, and his name will be called, a wonderful counselor is the mighty God, and everlasting Father is the ruler of peace. Meaning that there are really only two Hebrew names in the verse, which are given to a human being and not to a divine being, even though the names make a statement about God. Those names, like Anthony Alexander in the example I used, Pele Yoetz El Gibor Avi Ad Sar Shalom. The way it's written in the original Hebrew, the names would be hyphenated as Pele Yoetz El Gibor Avi Ad Sar Shalom. Lengthy names like these were not uncommon in the Bible, in Isaiah explicitly, by the way. For example, Isaiah 8:3, we find the name Maher Shalal Chashbaz, which means the spoil speeds, the prey hastens, more or less. The Christian interpretation of Isaiah 9:6 is that Jesus was wonderful, and Jesus was a counselor, or depending upon how you want to translate this, Jesus was a wonderful counselor, a mighty God, an everlasting Father, and a Prince of Peace. But if you pick up the New Testament and actually read it, how would these descriptive names apply to Jesus? Okay, you may remember when we started talking about the section 2 of my book, we were talking about typologies. You may remember the story I told of Pinocchio. Go read it. Go look it up again in our videos. Okay, is the description of the person described in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6 through 7, which at first, if you want to say it sounds like Jesus, that's fine. But if you examine it more closely, does it really describe Jesus? So, for example, they say that this person about whom Isaiah 9:6 is speaking is known as a wonderful counselor. But if you take a look at the Christian's New Testament, we find two stories about Jesus that really don't describe that person, Jesus, as a wonderful counselor. So Matthew chapter 8, verse 21 to 22. And another of his disciples said unto him, Lord, suffer me first, allow me first, to go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, follow me and let the dead bury their dead. Would a wonderful counselor tell a man who had recently lost his beloved father not to see to his father's funeral? Or John chapter 18, verse 22 to 23. And when Jesus had spoken this way, one of the officers which stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, you answer the high priest this way? Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why did you smite me? Everyone is familiar with the quotation from Jesus, do not resist someone who is evil, but if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other as well. It's found in Matthew chapter 5, verse 39. But in John chapter 18, 22 to 23, Jesus does not turn his other cheek to the one who struck him, but instead rebukes him. I thought if you say one thing and do something else, you're called a hypocrite. How can a hypocrite be a wonderful counselor, giving people advice they themselves don't take? Okay, the text of Isaiah 9:6 calls Jesus mighty God. Okay, Matthew chapter 27, verse 46. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? If Jesus were in fact the mighty God, why did he call on someone else as God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why did Jesus call on someone else, a different entity, as God to save him? Can God forsake himself? So the whole concept, by the way, denies the whole idea of a Trinity and shows how Jesus doesn't fit the description of Isaiah 9:6. Take a look at Matthew chapter 19, 16 to 17. And behold, one came and said to him, Good master, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? And Jesus said back to him, Why callest thou me good? There is none good but one that is God. Why are you calling me good? Only God is good. But if you would enter into life, keep the commandments. So in Matthew 19, 16, and 17, Jesus is distinguishing between himself and God. So if Jesus distinguishes between himself and God, how could he have been the mighty God of Isaiah 9:6 if he himself is distinguishing between himself and God? If Jesus knew that Jesus wasn't good, if Jesus knew that only God is good and therefore nobody should call Jesus good because only God is good, then Jesus knew that Jesus was not God. The next name in Isaiah 9:6 is that this person is going to be called an everlasting Father. Wait a minute. Make up your mind. Is Jesus the Father or is Jesus the Son? Why would they call him everlasting Father if Jesus isn't the Father, he's the Son? And the Christian New Testament, as we just saw, distinguishes heavily between the Father and the Son. You can't be both at the same time. Jesus himself showed that he was not the Father and claimed not to have the same will, knowledge, strength, power as the Father. Matthew 26, verse 39. And he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. So that means that Jesus calls the one to whom he prayed his Father. So he's not the everlasting Father. And in Matthew 26:39, he explicitly says that his will is not the same as the Father. So if their will is not the same, how can they be one and the same? Schizophrenia? Okay. Jesus could not be the Father if the will of Jesus is not the same as the will of the Father. Jesus and the Father are separate, they are unequal, and of course that means you can't accept the idea of a Trinity. Mark 13, verse 32. But of that day and that hour knows no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, not the Son, but the Father. So here in Mark 13, 32, Jesus is saying that there is knowledge that the Father has that the Son does not. They don't have the same will. Now they don't have the same knowledge. How can they be one and the same? And therefore, how can Isaiah say that Jesus, who's like 700 years later than Isaiah, should be called or known or will be known as an everlasting Father? Okay. John chapter 20, verse 17. These are not by any stretch of the imagination the only places in the New Testament where Jesus distinguishes between himself and the Father. John 20, verse 17. Jesus said to her, Do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and to your God. So Jesus is equating the relationship that he has with God the Father to the relationship that the disciples have to his Father, who is their God and Jesus is God. How can the Father ascend to himself? In the verse, John 20, verse 17, Jesus not only distinguishes between himself and his Father, he makes it sound as though the relationship he has with the Father is the same relationship that all people have with God, who is in fact the Father of us all. Okay. And finally, the last descriptive name that this person in Isaiah 9 is given is Prince of Peace. That is a bad translation. The words in the original Hebrew are Sar Shalom. You'll find a bunch of churches called, Prince of Peace Church or whatever. But the Hebrew is Sar Shalom. Shalom obviously means peace, but the word Sar does not mean prince. It means ruler. Now you could say that, yes, a prince is a ruler. But the reason why the Christians choose the word prince instead of the better translation of ruler is because they want you to start thinking about the prince who's the son of the king. They want to put the image in your mind of Jesus being the son of the Father, son of God, son of the king. So they say Prince of Peace instead of saying ruler of peace, to give you the idea of prince means son of the king, God is the king, Jesus is the son, and they're trying to plant that idea in your head by explicitly using the word prince instead of the word ruler. People will say, oh, but Rabbi, doesn't the word Sarah, doesn't that mean princess? No, it means female ruler. But it's easier to say princess, it's nicer to say princess than it does to say female ruler. Christian translators intentionally chose the English word prince to make people think about Jesus. In the Christian New Testament, there's a quotation which certainly does not show Jesus to have been a ruler or even a prince of peace. Matthew 10:34-36, think not that I have come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foes shall be they of his own household. Who could say something like that and be considered a ruler of peace or even a prince of peace? No one who said such a thing could have been the Messiah. We know that the true Messiah will actually bring an everlasting peace, and along with Elijah the prophet, will bring families closer to each other and not further apart. Take a look at Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. Take a look at Micah chapter 4, verse 1 through 4. Take a look at Malachi chapter 4, verse 5, where it talks about Elijah the prophet, who has the same goals as the real Messiah, and will put the family back together. Okay. Have you ever noticed that Christians, when they quote Isaiah 9:6, never really get around to talking about Isaiah 9:7? Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it, to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the eternal of hosts will perform this. Have you ever noticed that it kind of leaves off verse 7? Interesting. Okay. Why would they leave it off? Because to include it would emphasize how Jesus never brought peace to the world, nor did he ever intend to, as we quoted from Matthew 10:34-36. You also have to remember that Jesus was a violent person. He wasn't a prince of peace. He wasn't even a ruler of peace. And there are verses in the Christian New Testament that kind of indicate this. Here's just two of them. Okay. Jesus tells this parable about a man that leaves his land to go somewhere else to be anointed as king, and then he comes back to the land. Okay, at the end of that parable about himself, and I don't think I've ever seen a Christian commentator ever say that Jesus was talking about anybody else but himself for this parable. But in Luke chapter 19, verse 27, but those who are my enemies, who would not that I should reign over them, bring them hither and slay them in front of me. Jesus is saying that those who do not wish to have him reign over them should be murdered in front of him. Prince of Peace? I don't think so. Okay, another verse, Jesus tells his followers to go and buy a sword. Luke 22, verse 35. Luke 22:35. And he said to them, when I sent you without purse, without scrip, without shoes, did you lack anything? And they said, nothing. Then said he to them, but now he that has a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip. And he that has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. When I sent you without purse and scrip and shoes, did you ever lack anything? No. Well, now I want you to go buy a sword. Prince of Peace? Ruler of Peace? So various quotations from the Christian's New Testament that Jesus was not a wonderful counselor, not a mighty God, not an everlasting Father, not a prince or even a ruler of peace, no matter how Christians want to make the original verses of Isaiah 9, 6-7 look. So real quick, who, according to the Jewish interpretation, who is Isaiah 9, 6-7 actually talking about? Take a look at the word Hezekiah, okay? Chizkiah in Hebrew. It comes from the word chazak and Yah. Chazak means strong or mighty, and Yah is a shortened name for God used as a suffix. So chazak Yah, okay, Chizkiah means mighty God, strong God. Judaism believes Isaiah 9, 6-7 refers to Hezekiah, Chizkiah, who reigned for almost 30 years, began reign as a young child. To us a child is given. The name Hezekiah, Chizkiah, is the same name in meaning as one finds in the verse 9, 6-7 as a mighty God. Okay, and end of that that proof text for Christianity. Next one, big one, Jeremiah 31, 31-34. Jeremiah 31, verse 31-34. According to Christian theology, Jeremiah 31:31 speaks of a new covenant. And what is a covenant? The term covenant means a synonym of covenant is testament, as in New Testament. So from their perspective, the new covenant here in Jeremiah 31:31 is actually talking about the New Testament. Covenant is testament. Okay. So, of course, Christians see a prophecy of their New Testament. And by the way, in Hebrews 8:13, Paul refers to Jeremiah 31, verse 31. In that he says, a new covenant he has made the first old. Now that which decays and waxes old is ready to vanish away. So in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 13, in referencing Jeremiah 31:31, where Jeremiah talks about a new covenant God is going to make, Paul is saying in Hebrews 8:13, that God is talking about a covenant that is old and fading away, but there's going to be a new covenant. The old covenant that's decaying and waxing old and ready to vanish is the covenant God made between God and the believing Jews, God and the Jewish people. And the new covenant, of course, is Christianity, New Covenant, New Testament Christianity. Have you ever seen an advertisement on television where a manufacturer has come out with a new and improved version of a product they're already known for, like, let's say, laundry detergent? They might say it's the new and improved version of the old laundry detergent. And the implication is that the one to no longer use is the old version. You need to get the new version. And that's exactly what they're saying when they talk about the New Testament in relation to the Old Testament, that the Old Testament, the testament between God and Jews, has been replaced by the New Testament. Again, testament means contract, covenant, agreement. When Christians use the term New Testament, it's a way of saying the new covenant that they feel exists between God and believing Christians, setting aside, replacing, renouncing, denouncing the old contract, the old covenant, the Old Testament between God and the Jews. Jews who respect their own faith and their own Hebrew scriptures should never refer to their own holy scriptures as the Old Testament. That term is insulting to Judaism and to Jews. We don't believe in a New Testament, so why in the world would we call our own Bible the Old Testament? Now, as we said, the first verse of Jeremiah 31, which is verse 31, speaks of a new covenant. Behold, the days come, saith the Eternal, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. So you got to ask the question, if God is talking about a new covenant, does it replace any of the covenants that God had already made with the Jews beforehand? When God makes a new covenant with the Jews, it reestablishes and reaffirms all the covenants that God had made with the Jews that came before it. For example, the covenant God made with Isaac did not replace or break the covenant God made with Abraham. The covenant that God made with Jacob did not replace or break the covenant God had already made with Isaac or the covenant God had already made with Abraham. Take a look at Leviticus chapter 26, verse 42. Okay? Leviticus 26, 42. In the verses leading up to 42, the Jews had been told that when they sin, they will be punished for their sin, but then they are told that God's covenant with them is eternal. Leviticus 26:42, then will I remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham will I remember, and I will remember the land. Had the covenant that God made with Isaac and Abraham been made null and void by the covenant God made with Jacob, why would God say that God will also remember the covenant with Isaac and Abraham? The covenant God made with the people of Israel through Moses also did not replace, did not break, did not renounce, did not denounce the covenant God had made with Jacob, or the covenant God made with Isaac, or the covenant God made with Abraham. Every subsequent covenant God makes with the Jewish people reaffirms and reestablishes the covenant that God made with the Jews that came before it. The covenant God made with the Jews is an eternal covenant. It's a covenant made with them and with their descendants and with all those who convert to Judaism. God's promise to the Jews that his covenant with them is eternal is repeated over and over and over again throughout the entirety of the TaNaCh. All right. Here's a few examples. Okay, Genesis 17, early in Judaism's history, the people of Israel's history, I should say. Genesis 17, 7-8. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your seed after you in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God to you and to your seed after you. And I will give to you and to your seed after you the land wherein you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. Okay, take a look at Genesis 17, 12-13. Take a look at Genesis 17, 19. All right, take a look at Psalm 105, verse 6-10. Psalm 105, 6-10. O you seed of Abraham, God's servant, you children of Jacob, his chosen. He is the eternal our God. His judgments are in all the earth. He has remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, which covenant he made with Abraham, and his oath unto Isaac, and confirmed the same to Jacob for a law and to Israel for an everlasting covenant. So, by the way, you can also find the verses from Psalm 105 in 1 Chronicles 16, 13-17. Okay? Again, the covenant that God made between God and the Jews is eternal, okay? It's also following the same passage we're talking about in Jeremiah 31, 31-34. Jeremiah 31, 31-34, but take a look at the very next verse. This is Jeremiah 31, 35. Thus says the Eternal, which gives the sun for a light by day and the ordinances of the moon and the stars for a light by night, which divides the sea when the waves thereof roar. The Eternal of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, saith the Eternal, then the seed of Israel shall cease from being a nation before me forever. Okay? When the sun can no longer give light by day, when the moon and the stars cannot give light by night, when God, when the sea is divided by the waves, okay? When that ceases, that's when God will no longer have a covenant between God and the Jews. Why? Because the earth will be destroyed and the Jews will not exist. Nobody else will exist either. If ever the sun, the moon, and the stars, as well as the sea and the waves, ever cease to exist, stop following the laws governing them, then of course the people of Israel would not exist because all of life would no longer exist. And only then would the covenant between God and the Jews also cease to exist. It's an eternal covenant. And when God makes a new covenant, it's with the Jews, and it only reaffirms and reestablishes the earlier covenants, which God had made with the Jews, as we saw regarding Leviticus 26, verse 42. Okay, so let's look again at our passage. Now we're on Jeremiah 31, 31-34. The first verses, behold, the days come, saith the Eternal, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Jacob. Why is this considered a prophecy? Because the first words of the verse, behold, the days come, says the Eternal. However, immediately before these few verses that begin with verse 31, Jeremiah 31, verse 31, there are additional verses that also begin the exact same way with exactly the same words. Behold, the days come, saith the Eternal. So when Christians refer to Jeremiah 31:31 to 34, they're leaving out verses of the prophecy because the prophecy actually begins with verse 27. When you look at the whole prophecy of Jeremiah 31:27 to 34, this passage simply could not be referring to anything of Christianity at all. Look at the whole passage. Behold, the days come, saith the Eternal, that I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man and with the seed of beasts. And it shall come to pass that like as I have watched over them to pluck up and to break down and to throw down and to destroy and to afflict, so will I watch over them to build and to plant, saith the Eternal. Verse 29. In those days they shall say no more, the fathers have eaten the sour grape, where the children's teeth are set on edge. Verse 30. But everyone shall die for his own sin. Everyone shall die for his own iniquity. Every man that eats the sour grape, his teeth shall be set on edge. And then you have verse 31. Behold, the days come, saith the Eternal, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, although I was a husband unto them, says the Eternal. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Eternal, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, every man his brother, saying, Know the Eternal, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, saith the Eternal. For I will forgive their sin, their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. These verses speak of a messianic age, but they're not speaking of the coming of Jesus in Christianity. Verse 27 speaks of a time when the house of Israel is reunited with the house of Judah, and when they increase in size as well as in resources. Verse 27, Behold, the days come, saith the Eternal, that I will sow the house of Israel, northern kingdom, and the house of Judah, the southern kingdom, with the seed of man and with the seed of beast. Okay, sowing the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man means increasing the population. Increasing the seed of beast means that the people, okay, have greater resources. Then God states that just as he watched over the Jews when he saw fit to punish them, so too now will he continue to watch over the Jews as everything improves. Verse 28, And it shall come to pass that like as I have watched over them to pluck up and to break down and to throw down and to destroy and to afflict, so will I watch over them to build and to plant, says the Eternal. The next verse actually denies the most basic beliefs of Christianity, that Jesus can die for your sins. Verse 29 and verse 30, immediately preceding verse 31 to 34, that Christians want to say is actually all about Jesus. Verse 29, In those days they shall say no more, the fathers have eaten the sour grape, and the children's teeth are set on edge. But everyone shall die for his own sin. Every man that eats the sour grape, his teeth shall be set on edge. Verses 29 and 30 of Jeremiah 31 are saying that in this future time, nobody's going to continue to believe that one person can die and thereby take away the guilt for someone else's sins. It's shown by those who recite an old saying, which is also found, by the way, in Ezekiel 18, that the father eats sour grapes, but that it's the children who taste the sourness. Their mouth gets sour. This old saying expressed the erroneous belief that the parents would sin, but that it was the children who inherited the guilt of their parents' sins. Instead, Jeremiah is saying that when those days come, everybody's going to recognize, as the Bible has said repeatedly, how about, Exodus 32, 30 to 35, Deuteronomy 24:16, Ezekiel 18 verses 1 to 4, Ezekiel 18 verse 20, that the person who sins is the only one who gets the punishment for that sin. Of course, this means that Jesus cannot die for your sin, which is what it states simply and clearly in Deuteronomy 24:16. No man shall be put to death for the sins of his children. No child will be put to death for the sins of his father. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin. This description of the Messianic age continues with Jeremiah 31:31, which is the passage that Christians quote without the verses that came before it. We see the same kind of thing reflected in 31 to 34 that Christians always quote. The first verse of the passage reads, Behold, the days come, saith the Eternal, that I will make a new covenant. But look who it's with. with the house of Israel, northern kingdom, and with the house of Judah, southern kingdom, reunited. All the tribes will be found, and they'll be reunited. The house of Israel, which was made up of the 10 lost tribes, have been lost and scattered around the world since the fall of the northern kingdom, give or take 721 BCE. The house of Israel, the 10 lost tribes, cannot be reunited with the house of Jacob because the house of Israel has not been completely found for thousands of years. That's why they are called the 10 lost tribes. This passage in Jeremiah is describing a Jewish people where all the descendants of every tribe thrives and has made their way to the promised land, living together with the Jews of the southern kingdom, northern kingdom together. Because it speaks of both the house of Israel and the house of Judah together with God in a single new covenant. And since the house of Israel cannot be unified with the house of Judah, the entire passage has not happened yet and cannot refer to Christianity or their new covenant. There's another reference, also in Jeremiah, in the 23rd chapter of Jeremiah, not Jeremiah 31:31, it's Jeremiah 23, that describes the same thing where all the Jews have returned to the promised land, which also begins with the same words found in Jeremiah 31:27 and Jeremiah 31:31. Look at Jeremiah 23, 5-8. Behold, the days come, saith the Eternal, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth. In his days Judah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely. And this is his name whereby he shall be called. The Eternal is our righteousness. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Eternal, same phrase, that they shall no more say the Eternal lives, which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but rather the Eternal lives, which brought up and which led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country and from all countries where I had driven them to, and they shall dwell in their own land. And that, of course, leads us to the next two verses of our passage, Jeremiah 31:32 and 33. Not according to the covenant that I made with their ancestors, their fathers, in the days that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, although I was a husband to them, says the Eternal. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, says the Eternal, I will put my Torah in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. What these verses are saying is that you're not going to have to look anymore into any book to find out what God wants. Okay? You're not going to have to look in the Hebrew Scriptures. You're not even going to have to look in the New Testament. You're not going to look anywhere to find out what's right and wrong, because they're going to know it instinctively, because it'll be in their hearts, truly making God their God, and in turn, truly making them God's people. Certainly this has not happened yet, and this passage cannot be referring to Christianity, and it cannot be referring to their New Testament. So what exactly does it mean to have God's Torah written in our innermost parts? How about Psalm 40, verse 8? I delight to do your will, O my God. Yes, your Torah is within my heart. Because God's Torah is within us, we know what we are to do, and we're happy to do it. Also read carefully Jeremiah 31:33. It doesn't say I will put a new Torah, a new covenant in their inward parts, a new Torah, new law in their inward parts. It says I will put my Torah in their inward parts. It's the same Torah as before. The laws of God do not change or get changed. They're eternal because God is eternal, and God is eternal in the same way that the covenant God made with the Jews, who are the covenant, who are the eternal people. With God is an eternal God. People are eternal people. Covenant, eternal covenant. Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to the eternal our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this Torah. Psalm 19:7-9. The Torah of the eternal is perfect, reviving the soul, converting the soul. The testimony of the eternal is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the eternal are right, rejoicing in the heart. The commandment of the eternal is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the eternal is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the eternal are true and righteous altogether. Psalm 111, verse 7-8. The works of his hands are verity and judgment. All his commandments are sure. They stand fast forever and ever, and are done in truth and uprightness. Ezekiel 11, 17 to 20 reflects the idea found in Jeremiah 31, 27 to 34, that God's laws will be in our hearts, not in books, in the age of the real Messiah, and that age will last forever. Ezekiel 11, 17 to 20. Therefore say, thus says the eternal God, I will even gather you from the people and assemble you out of the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. And they shall come thither, and they shall take away all the detestable things thereof and all the abominations thereof from there. And I will give them one heart, and I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take the stony heart out of your flesh and will give them a heart of flesh, that they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God. And as we talked about earlier, this new covenant that God speaks about in Jeremiah chapter 31 isn't talking about a new covenant, a new contract with a different people made up of different laws. It's not a new Torah. It's not a new scripture. It means the covenant God had already made between God and the Jews, and the laws of that covenant are also eternal. Finally, the text from Jeremiah 31, the Christians quote, Jeremiah 31 to 34. Let's look at verse 34. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, Know the eternal, for they shall all know me from the least of them to the greatest of them, saith the eternal. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. The new covenant means that nobody's going to have to missionize anybody else to know the eternal, because the whole world will already believe in God. This part of the passage especially has not happened yet, and every time Christians missionize the Jews, they are proving that it has not happened. If it already happened, if this covenant had already taken place, Christianity wouldn't have a need to missionize anybody and get anybody to know the eternal, because we'd already know the eternal. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year just to missionize the Jews, just to get the Jews to know the eternal, to know the Lord, their Lord. Then this prophecy in Jeremiah 31 has not happened yet, and Christian missionaries prove it every single day. Okay, again, I forgot to say this in the beginning of this video. I'm not claiming to give you every single argument against every single verse that they take out of context, misquote, mistranslate, whatever. I'm giving in my book just a simple, quick response that shows that the Jewish way of interpreting is just as valid, more valid, than the way in which Christians want to give it the interpretation. All right, next one. This is the eighth verse of the 10. Psalm 110, verse 1. Okay, as recently as yesterday, I had somebody trying to show me this. Okay, Psalm 110, verse 1. A psalm of David. The Lord said to my Lord, Sit thou at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. Notice in this verse that both times Lord and Lord are used, they are both capitalized. Okay, Christians see this verse as a statement that God, referred to in the first use of the word Lord, was speaking to Jesus, referred to in the second use of the word Lord. Christians understand this verse to be saying, God said to Jesus, of course, kind of makes you want to ask a question. If Jesus were God, then why would God the Father have to make Jesus' enemies into Jesus' footstool? If Jesus were God, couldn't he be able to do that on his own? Shouldn't he be able to do that on his own? Okay. Be that as it may, there are other great problems with this verse from Psalm 110, verse 1. You have to know, surely you know, that there are no capital letters in Hebrew. And when they capitalize, the Lord said to my Lord, capitalizing both times the word Lord is used, okay, in their English translation, it makes it seem as though both words refer to deity or to someone who's divine. It leads the reader to view this verse as one divine entity speaking to another divine entity, which is an interpretation in and of itself, because they're choosing to capitalize the first letter of the word in both uses of the word Lord. To really understand this verse, or for that matter, any verse from the Hebrew Scriptures, you really should read it in the original Hebrew. So the verse in transliteration reads, Le David Mizmor Ne'um, then the four-letter name for God, Le Adoni. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to translate Le David Mizmor. The reason is that the prefix, the Le David, the L sound, the Lamed, can mean of, it can mean for, or it can mean to. This means that there are three different translations that are all possible: of David, for David, or to David. If the correct translation is of David, then it would mean that David wrote the psalm, his possession. However, if the correct translation is to David, Le David Mizmor, to David a psalm, or if it really meant for David a psalm, then it would mean that this was written by someone other than King David. We don't know who the author would be. And this unknown author dedicated it to King David, or he wrote it for King David, which means that when it says, Le David Mizmor, to David, for David, of David, a psalm, then it means God said to my master. The first word used in the verse is translated as Lord. It's the holiest name for God. It's the tetragrammaton, the four-lettered name for God. But the second word that is translated as Lord is not the four-letter name for God, is not the tetragrammaton, but rather it's the word Adoni, which means my master, or my lord as in lords and ladies of Old England. In other words, nobility. This is the way that the authors of the King James translation would have understood it. The better way to translate this phrase would therefore be, God said to my master, and would have been written by a psalmist other than King David about King David, at least two out of the three ways to translate Le David. So it was written by a psalmist other than King David about King David and dedicated for King David. So it really should be, and God said to King David. The verse was written about King David. It was written for King David. The author is saying that God was going to make King David's enemies to King David's footstool, meaning that King David was going to walk all over his enemies. And by the way, that's exactly what happened. King David walked all over his enemies. He defeated the Philistines and forced the Moabites to become a tributary, to pay tribute.
Okay, so quick interjection, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Okay, so we have some more heavy storms rolling this way. It'll be here in about 15 minutes, and we've got some uncovered vehicles. And we're kind of we're about 45, 50 minutes in right now, but if you are at a place where we could wrap up and just make a part
I'm
three.
almost there. I've only got a few things to go over.
Okay.
Give me literally 1 minute.
Okay, that's fine. I'm kind of like freaking out because the weather's really bad, hail and high winds.
Finish up real quick.
Awesome, cool. Plus, I don't want to get cut off either mid-strike.
No, I don't want that either.
Okay, good.
Quickly,
all right.
Christians want to see this verse as a proof text, Psalm 110, verse 1, for their Christian theology. It's interesting the way in which Jesus uses the verse in Jesus' own Christian New Testament. Jesus quotes the verse to prove that the Messiah was not going to be a descendant of King David, in spite of the fact that Judaism and the Jewish people have always believed that the Messiah had to be a descendant of King David. Take a look at Matthew chapter 22, verse 41 to 46. Matthew 22, 41 to 46. Jesus quotes Psalm 110, verse 1, and also sees this as King David writing about how God spoke to the Messiah. However, Jesus asks, how can the Messiah be the descendant of King David if King David himself refers to the Messiah as King David's Lord? Matthew 22, 41 to 46. While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, saying, what think you of Christ? Whose son is he? They said to him, the son of David. He said, how then does David in spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit thou on my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. If David calls him Lord, how is he his son? And no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst, I love that word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask him any more questions. Jesus is saying that since David calls this entity Lord, would a human being call his own son his own Lord? That the son is going to lord it over the father? So he's saying he can't be a descendant of King David because David in Psalm 110 calls him Lord. Why would he do that? Why would Jesus say, using the same Psalm 110 verse 1, that the Messiah isn't a descendant of David unless he himself knew he himself wasn't a descendant of David and wanted to give a rationalization and justification that he was still the Messiah? They want to view Psalm 110 as though it proves the Messiah will be God, but Jesus in the Christian's own New Testament uses the same verse to prove that the Messiah, if he is divine, can't be a descendant of King David. Jesus, according to Christian theology, was himself a descendant of King David. So according to Jesus in the above verses, Jesus could not have been the Messiah. You can't have it both ways. Okay? Hope you followed that last couple of statements. Okay? But that's it. Start at 9 next week. Hello? Uh-oh.
1 second, Rabbi. Hang on. Keep talking for a second.
All right. All right, then I'm going to go back to that for a minute. Okay.
Okay, sorry, we're plugging this out. I apologize.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm trying to figure out how to coordinate, get both my sons out there to move things around while we finish up.
No, we're done. We're done.
Okay, cool. I didn't mean to rush you. It was just
no.
We actually had some really, really, really bad storms.
By the way, if you want a better explanation than how fast I rattled this off, buy the book. Or take a look at whatjewsbelieve.org.
There you go. It's awesome. If you don't have it, it's Judaism and Christianity Contrast. Also available in Spanish. Judaism.
Yes. Creenciajudia.org.
There you go. Cool. Okay, guys. Love you all, man. It's been great. We'll see you same time, same place next week, Hashem willing. And y'all have a wonderful week. And Rabbi, you as well. Take care, everybody. Peace, everybody. Peace. Thanks.
Hello, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going, and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNaChTalk.com. TaNaChTalk.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה